Can, yes.
All right, so there's two of us, right? There's my partner Prem and I, and we were actually born just one day apart. His birthday is 27 March 78, mine's 28 March. So although we're aliens, it must have been like a fishy star, right? But we didn't meet until 2008. But we both had very, very similar steps in the hobby. It started off as a hobby. It started off as my mom, I think, just brought in two guppies from a trade fair, the trade fair that used to happen. So she kept fish when she was a kid, but I
Okay.
hadn't. And we grew up in a house where we had like a walk-in bird cage, we had dogs, we had rabbits. So it was like a menagerie, really. And
Is this
but we
your
never kept
old
fish.
old madras? Is this the old madras that you're talking about? Large
That's right.
houses with gardens.
That's right. Yeah,
Okay.
we had a beautiful garden. So we spent a lot of time outdoors and quite loved nature and animals and all of that. But we never kept fish. So mom brought home this male and female. There's a pair of guppies, um, and we kept them in a bottle. And the female was pregnant, and then she started giving birth. Now I don't know what you know about guppies and all, but they give birth to live babies. They don't lay eggs. So
Right.
the babies drop and they start swimming right away. So in those days, you never had Discovery Channel, Animal Planet, and all of that. So to actually see that life happen in front of you was magical for me, right? So that's where I got
I
hooked.
remember freaked out by other fish eating the ones that were just born also
No,
in a
so
tank.
mom knew her stuff. So those days we had one big collection of Horlicks bottles, right, in the shed. So we, because there were 108 babies from that female, I know because I counted each and every one, right? And 108 babies, we had to separate them like 10 in, 8 to 10 in each bottle because mom knew you had to like separate them and stuff. Um, and that's it. I was hooked. I was absolutely fascinated. It is something that I'd never seen before. And slowly that hobby grew into an obsession. And I found that, so it took over my house as well. I had 32 tanks. By my 10th grade, I had 32 tanks in the house. The
Wow.
largest was a 6 foot one, which was quite large at that time. And those days we didn't have the internet, so knowledge transfer was very limited. But it got to the point where I would ask for like aquarium books or aquarium fish books for my birthday rather than anything else and
Mm-hmm.
get the learning from there. And then through word of mouth, as we grew up, someone, a friend of a friend, would want to see my tank, and my friend would bring him here. Or I would go to another friend's house or a friend of a friend. That's all. It is very limited. So 2008 is when me and Prem met, and I just returned from the UK. Well, actually, not just returned. I returned in 2005, and I didn't know anything. I mean, I kept on going with the hobby. Through school, it was fun because you learn so much about chemistry and other concepts, through the hobby. But then I went for my master's in the UK and then came back and I was working and I didn't really set up anything at that time. But I started searching
Interesting.
online.
Chemistry, Ashwin.
Sorry,
I
say
heard you
again.
say. I heard you say chemistry. I
Mhm.
would imagine a lot of zoology and related subjects. Where did the
Yeah,
chemistry come from?
water chemistry. So, in order to keep the fish correctly and to allow them to not just survive but thrive, you need to know what those water parameters should be. So, for example, whether they need soft water, so softness, hardness, alkalinity, acidity, pH levels, all of that stuff comes into play. How much organic
Okay.
material should be in the water, all of that stuff.
Okay, so kids can learn a lot, not just
A
about
lot.
fish, but so the concepts. Yes.
That's why I keep saying I think it's one of the most educational hobbies out there. And I've been through a few hobbies, so I feel I'm well equipped to sort of say that. People might disagree, but I think the amount of learning you can get, the amount, number of concepts that you're taught in school that this can actually make real or bring to life is much more than any other hobby. Chemistry, biology, as you get into bigger tanks and stuff and DIY, some amount of physics as well comes into play. But at the hobby level, definitely chemistry, biology, life cycle, the environment, all of that, the symbiotic behavior between plants and fish, and that whole cycle is what you can see beautifully. Like in a planted tank, like behind me, um, basically what happens is Uh, are you aware? You must be aware of the nitrogen cycle, Uma,
Yes, yes, yes.
right? So in the aquatic scenario, so fish poop, that releases ammonia as it decomposes. Ammonia is very, very toxic to fish. But after some time, you'll find this bacteria. I keep mixing up the names, Nitrosomonas or Nitrobacter. I can never remember which. That comes in and starts building up, and that breaks down the ammonia into nitrite. Nitrite is also toxic to fish, but in larger quantities. You need more nitrite. Little bit of ammonia is enough to kill fish. You need a little bit more of
Mm-hmm.
nitrite, but it's still toxic. After some time, there's the other bacteria, Nitrobacter, comes in, starts converting the nitrite to nitrate. The beauty is in a planted tank, like the system behind me, the plants use nitrate as fertilizer, right? That's what they use to grow. So you've got this whole circle of life, like a self-sustaining ecosystem that you can create.
Mm-hmm.
And if anything, there is an imbalance anywhere, you will see it. Either the fish suffer, or the plants suffer, or algae starts to take over. So as an experimental method, it's something that we've learned a lot through trial and error on how to achieve that balance. But you get to sort of extrapolate that when you go into the wild and look at these habitats, as we have done, and see how delicate that balance is, and how fragile the whole ecosystem can be. So,
Tell
yeah,
me about fragile, yes. Just a random question.
yeah.
You spoke about creating this environment that's self-sustaining, that's almost symbiotic, and all of that.
Hmm.
We are now stuck in a situation none of us asked for, none of us expected, almost in a tank, as it were, right?
Yeah.
So, what is our ecosystem in comparison?
Well, when I say self-sustaining, there are limitations. We do not have the natural checks and balances that nature has, so we have to provide some of them ourselves. So, like the tank behind me has a filtration system running, all of that stuff. So take that with a bit of a pinch of salt because there are things we need to do to sort of constantly maintain, monitor that balance. Our ecosystem, I definitely is not sustainable, right? I think that's very, very clear from the way things have gone. So I think ours is built on constructs that perhaps are not going to work in the long run.
Um, about aquascapes,
Hmm.
it's beautiful, lovely that you converted a hobby into a profession that you love. So it's no longer work, you love what you do. How
Yeah.
many types of aquascapes are there typically?
So there are quite a few. Before I touch upon that, these slides actually show some fish habitat study trips. When I talk about going into nature and understanding the impact, we've actually done that. A lot of hobbyists go into the wild and see Indian fish. There are beautiful Indian fish. The habitats are all under threat, especially in the Western Ghats, where I've done extensively. Uh, Beautiful, beautiful fish. So it's really important to sort of understand that. So I think from the point of view of understanding our Indian habitats, Indian ecosystem, and Indian species, this is also a
Mhm.
great kind of hobby to get that learning into place. Okay, so that's just an aside I wanted to cover. Um, Aquascapes, you know, until a certain point, there wasn't the concept of an aquascape. You kept a tank, you had fish, you tried to keep them healthy. Maybe you tried to grow some plants. There was no concept of making it look pretty or any aesthetic kind of principles to it until this guy came along. The person you see on the screen is a gentleman called Takashi Amano. I think you spoke about him the other day, right?
Yes.
So he was the master, and he is a photographer by profession. But he started this company called ADA, and he brought in so many different things. The use of carbon dioxide injection, all the technical stuff he brought in. But I think the biggest contribution was the fact the whole art of aquascaping it came from him. He used Japanese principles in terms of layout, composition, same principle we use in photography, golden ratio, those points, etc. And it just created stunning, stunning aquascapes. So after him, there have been different schools of aquascape. There's the Indonesian style, there's the Chinese style, there's the Brazilian style now. There's whole different things that flowed from there, but it all came from, it became popular because of this guy and the internet. So various kinds of styles are there. Let me walk you through. This, in a nutshell, shows planted tanks versus non-planted tanks, and there are different types here. Let's start off with rocky habitats. Rocky habitats are typically something like this. This is without the fish, right? But typically we use fish called cichlids here, and we're trying to recreate. And typically the most common species is Malawi cichlids. Now, Africa has three reflakes: Malawi, Tanganyika, and Victoria. The most common and more affordable species are the Malawi cichlids. They're actually quite colorful. Now, the reason we stress upon just a rock and sand environment and no wood here is it gives a very natural environment to the fish, and that helps them sort of display natural behaviors. For
Where does
example,
the blue color come from? Where does the blue
the
color come
lighting.
from?
The lighting. These fish show up nicely, like you have blues and yellows that show up quite nicely in the blue light. So that's why you see in the bottom left here as well. This uses lava rock. This uses another kind of rock called Seriu stone. And here again, you have some gooeying rock. So the idea is to create like crevices, etc., where the fish can create territories. So they're very aggressive, very territorial. But they can create territories here. Now, the beauty about giving them, see, none of these fish, very few are actually imported. Most of them are bred here. But they have the genetic memory, right? So you give them, if you put plants in, they will eat them. If you put wood, they will not feel comfortable. And the thing about making them feel comfortable is that you get to see natural behavior. For example, those Malawi cichlids, the females are mouth brooders. The moment she lays the eggs, the female takes the eggs into her mouth to protect them. That little fish will starve for 8 to 9 weeks to keep those babies safe.
Wow.
And people normally think, fish are like these dumb creatures. Yeah, they look pretty, they swim around, all of that stuff. But there's so much more. I'm not talking about the goldfish. Goldfish are different. They lay the eggs, the parents themselves will eat their own eggs. They don't really care. There are so many fish out there which show beautiful parental care. So this fish, first 4 weeks, it takes for the eggs to hatch in the mouth. All the time, even if you feed them, she'll come darting around like the other fish very excitedly. She'll never open her mouth. The remaining 5 weeks, the eggs are hatched and the babies are in the mouth. And swimming lessons come in. Somewhere under the rocks, in one shadow, in one crevice, safe from other fish, because for other fish, they're a protein source. They'll eat them. So they hide them, swimming lessons. She lets them out from her mouth. Any sign of danger, any passing shadow, back in the mouth. And it's beautiful to see. We've actually seen that in our setups and our tanks, right? And after another 5 weeks of swimming lessons, she said, boss, you're out of the house, you're on your own, I need to eat, fix them out. So in a community setup, like we can't remove all these rocks and get all the babies out, right? So some survive, the smartest ones survive, the rest don't. But you get to see this beautiful behavior, right? Now, in terms of the aesthetic angle of it, we have also evolved. The more setups you do, the more you evolve. So here, this is actually comprised of about 300 kilos of rock. It is a 2.5-foot tall tank in Hyderabad. We just completed this in February. And each of these are placed so that tomorrow we are not there for maintenance. Someone comes, they're all glued together. So it's not easy. It looks like a mountain, it's a mountainscape. But to get it to sort of sit and flow and look like one, unified mass rather than a pile of rocks, it takes a bit of effort. So the idea is that this will provide a perfect home for all these fish to have different territories, break up their line of sight, and reduce aggression. That's one way to do it. Here, we've done a slightly different take. I will speak about a style called the iwagumi a little later. The iwagumi is a Japanese word. It's a kind of rock layout style. The Japanese used in rock gardens, popularized by Amano. So you have a primary rock, which is the one on the left. You have a secondary rock, which is that one on the right, and you have like an odd number of rocks, supporting rock. You have a tertiary rock, supporting rock, etc. The idea, see, the client doesn't really care, but the idea is to create that visual tension. Usually, this is done in a planted tank context. Here, we try to mix it up a little and said, why can't we're using only rocks? There are no plants. We'll create that visual tension anyway using the Iwagumi layout. So that's what we've done here. It's a much smaller tank, like a 4-foot tank for Johnson lengths, right? So this is one side. It's probably the lowest maintenance. The fish are perfectly suited to Chennai conditions because they love warm water and they love hard water. So you don't have to change the water parameters to keep these guys happy, right? So in terms of aquascapes, the rocky habitat is probably the lowest maintenance and something that's quite popular.